I'm Andrew, and I'm setting out to make better videos for diesel enthusiasts. Follow along as I review products, do how-tos, and share my personal trucks here on Just Diesels. Hey guys, today we are going to be living out every second-gen owner's dream and doing a built transmission. My truck came with a 47 RE. It has been super sloppy from day one, and so we're going to be addressing that. Instead of doing a manual swap, I'm actually doing a built automatic, and we're going to Tier 1 transmissions in Arizona. Now, more specifically in this video, what we're going to be talking about is what separates a good transmission build from a bad transmission build, what shop you should be going to, and more importantly, what are the fatal flaws that we need to be addressing in this transmission that make it so bad from the factory. So I got this thing loaded up a trailer behind my 3rd gen. We're going to hit the road, and yeah, let's head to Phoenix, Arizona. Located in Phoenix, Arizona, Tier 1 seems to be growing in popularity pretty quickly, and after pulling up to the shop, it kind of all made sense. Their staff came right out, said a friendly hello, and got straight to work on the truck. These guys know exactly what they're doing, and they are a class act from start to finish. Cruising around their shop, I was definitely not the only one there. They have transmissions everywhere. They are basically pumping these things out every single day. These guys know exactly what they are doing. Within a matter of minutes, they had the trans out of the truck on the bench, and they were tearing the thing down in front of me. It was really cool to watch. Now, as they pulled apart the trans, it was actually interesting to look at everything and see how much wear there was in the trans. So this is a 60,000 mile truck, so a very low mile truck. And overall, things looked pretty solid, but there was definitely already some signs of wear in the trans. The problem with these transmissions is that they slip. Line pressure is very low, and so you get a lot of extra wear in the clutch packs, and like I was saying before, you don't really get much forward movement out of these transmissions. They basically just make heat instead of movement. That said, that's why I'm here, and that's why I have these guys tearing into those trans. Now, of course, once they got the trans out of the truck, torn down, it was time to actually get into the build. And normally, if you were doing this, what you would do is you'd actually show up and they would have a transmission ready and waiting for you. But because my truck was so low mile and the trans is actually in pretty good shape, I wanted them to actually do the build on the transmission that was in this truck. That way I knew the case, all the, kept parts basically, only had 60,000 miles on it, whereas if I got a core off the shelf, who knows? And so to me, that was kind of worth the extra time and hassle. So I appreciate them accommodating me on that, because it's definitely not the norm. Normally they would either ship or have a trans ready to install. A couple hours, you'd be out the door. But with this one, they actually took my trans apart and they're going to be building my actual trans out of this truck. So speaking of the build in my truck, let's talk about what I actually did. So I opted for a stage 2 transmission. According to Tier 1, this is rated for about 450 horsepower, basically a moderately tuned truck, but nothing crazy. I'm not doing boosted launches. I'm not racing the truck, but this is a very capable transmission for towing, hauling, normal daily driver usage without being over the top and having, lock up in second gear, manual valve body, anything like that. This is just a very daily driver, practical. This is what trans you should do if you were just using your truck as a truck with some basic tuning, basic upgrades. So included in that stage 2 47 build is going to be the HD clutch packs, which is a 5 clutch pack upgrade for the direct drive. There's also going to be a 6 clutch overdrive upgrade, so more clutch packs, more friction material. We'll get into that later. It's also going to have a 3-bolt sprag, a high pressure valve body, billet accumulator, billet second servo, HD strut, lever and anchor, an aluminum deep pan that's included in the build, and a billet single disc torque converter along with a machined stator and a billet flex plate. Now, out of that list of parts, there's 2 things that should stand out: the torque converter and the valve body. Most transmission shops, when you're doing a built trans, if you just go down the road to a built trans shop, what they're going to do is basically accumulate parts from a couple different manufacturers, just off-the-shelf parts, Sonax, Garin, things like that. Good, reliable parts, but again, just off-the-shelf stuff. What's cool about going to a shop like Tier 1 is that they're actually doing some unique stuff that's only available through them in-house. So torque converters are actually unique to them, and they're made by a local shop in Arizona down the street from them to their specs. So if you get a Tier 1 torque converter, it's different than if you get a torque converter from pretty much anywhere else for a transmission. So that was one thing that was cool about this. The other thing that's cool about them, and really the big reason I went to them, was their valve body work. So while most places will use an off-the-shelf valve body, Tier 1 actually takes those off-the-shelf valve bodies, machines them, drills out certain ports, and basically completely customizes them to their requirements. Now in these older transmissions like this 47RE, the valve body is everything. The valve body is what is going to control the trans, determine shift points, all that stuff. We're going to talk about this more in depth later, but the valve body is a really key part of the transmission. And it's basically why I went to Tier 1. So while the guys put together most of the hard parts in the transmission, I went over and started to watch the valve body get assembled. So what's cool about this is they actually go through and modify the valve body. You'll actually notice that they're drilling out different ports. They have a very specific way that they do this. And what's really cool is that once the valve body is done, they're gonna test it. So I'm not gonna pretend I know anything about valve bodies, but I'm gonna let them kind of walk you through what the valve body does and why this part is so interesting.
So basically we have here a 48RE valve body. The valve body is the brains of the transmission on a 48, tells it when to shift, how much pressure, basically is the whole design of that. Starting here, we have our governor plugs right here for our 1-2 shift valve and our 2-3 shift valves as well. Basically how those valves work is there's a solenoid in the transmission that just allows governor pressure to increase as you speed up in the truck, which allows you to shift from 1 to second, first to second, then second to third, and 3 to 4, and so on. Then you have some shuttle valves and some SCV valves that basically just control different areas in the transmission for shift firmness and help with pressures. You have your TV valve, it kind of falls in that same range as well. Your TV valve just offsets the governor pressure, so that way when you give the when you give your vehicle more throttle, it just offsets pressure to raise the shift points. And it also increases your line pressure as well by acting on the PR valve. Then you have your PR valve, which is basically the main regulator that controls everything inside the transmission for line pressure. Then you get onto your TCC switch valve that balances pressure inside the converter, and then when that valve switches, it applies lockup when the computer commands it, so you get a locked torque converter. Then you have, just like I mentioned before, your actual shift valves that are on the other side of the governor plugs. You have your 3-2 shift valve, or your 2-3 shift valve, and then you have your 1-2 shift valve, then you have your 1-2 shift control valve, and then you have your boost valve on the back side of it. This works with this valve right here and this valve to raise and lower line pressure, and also raise and lower your shift points as you give the vehicle more throttle. This is going to be your 3-2 kickdown. That works with the governor and basically forces this valve right here to switch back to allow a downshift. You have your 3-4 timing, your 3-4 quick fill. You have your 3-4, the actual shift valve, and then you have your lockup clutch shift valve, and then you have your lockup clutch timing valve. And then this is a 3-4 accumulator to help soften the blow on that shift or firm it up depending on how you build the valve body. And then after what I mentioned earlier with your torque converter, you have your torque converter timing, and then you have your torque converter switch valve as well. And all that does is the same thing as the 3-4 shift valve. There's a solenoid that drives it. And as soon as that valve has oil to the back side of it, it switches and then allows oil to go into the converter and reverse its fluid flow, and that applies your clutch. They have a balanced piston design, so all balanced piston design is oil flows through the center of the input around the backside into the pump. And then as soon as you apply that torque converter, it just reverses the flow, and then that piston applies and locks up with the torque converter clutch as well. 48, 47 valve bodies, very similar valve bodies. There are some big couple differences in those that allow the 48s to make more line pressure just right off the get-go, but here at Tier 1 we're able to basically get as much line pressure as we would desire with our 47s, and then modify our 48s as well to get, in most cases, a lot of our full manual stuff is 200 to 225. We could also maintain that with any 47 and any 48 valve body, but again, you only really need that type of line pressure for the higher end builds. Most of your other valve bodies are going to run anywhere from 80 to 130 in gears 1 through 3. And then basically once you get into fourth gear, and then lockup, you're going to go up to about 150 to 190 depending on the valve body. The 48 valve bodies, the upper casting is going to be anodized on those. Some of the 47s will have an anodized upper casting, but most of them have the just raw aluminum finish on it. The anodizing in a valve body helps make the surface of the bores and all that good stuff harder, so it's less prone to wear. The same as you'll notice a lot of your valves from the early 47s used to be steel. Then once you get into the newer ones, you'll notice they're aluminum valves, but they have an anodizing on them that makes the surface a lot harder. For some of the stuff we do is a lot of our stuff is transgo based on the kits, but we have different springs, different holes, different tricks and stuff like that to get the valve bodies to perform the way we want them to. So they're not just out of the box kit. It's something that's custom in-house here that only you can get here with our stuff. When the valve body comes in, it's fully torn down. As you can see, some of the valves will have wear on them, and there's certain areas of the valve body that you're always pretty much going to find wear unless it's like really low mileage. So we replace those valves. We have a reamer station so we can put brand new valves in it that return it back to factory spec. We have vacuum testers and we have valve body dynos to test all this stuff. It ensures the way it's designed to function. Once we do that inspection, we flat sand the valve body, clean it, check it for cracks, check it for any type of damage or worn out parts inside the valve body. Then it goes over to our valve body building station where our builder will confirm if anything needs replaced. He'll replace it, just like I said earlier, with reaming out everything. After he gets all that done, he'll start assembling it, doing all the custom modifications in-house, plus with anything else we may need to do. He gets that valve body fully torqued together, and then we install it on our valve body tester, and then we have a fully automated valve body tester that runs it through an entire script and makes sure that valve body will do exactly what we need it to with pass and fail parameters.
All right, so we're gonna be testing this 47 RE today. Already got it clamped down, all the connectors plugged in. Let's go on and begin the first test here. Just gonna make sure that the overdrive, the governor, and the TCC are all passing. All good to go here. Now when we start this test, we wanna make sure that the shifter here extends out all the way it needs to be. All right. All right. Now I'm just gonna make some small adjustments here. Make sure it fits in there nice and easy. There we go. All right. Turn the pump on here, make sure everything gets up to pressure. All right. Now we're gonna move the TV in. Make sure we're getting enough pressure here. Make sure it's at 250. Again, park, release and apply. Nothing else. No leaking anywhere. Reverse kicks on. Back down to neutral. All right, now we're in drive. All right. Now on the second part here, I'm gonna put the TV in. Start the test now. Okay. Everything's looking good so far, all in the green. Alright, we'll let that TV out here, finish up the test.
With this whole testing machine and bench testing these valve bodies, they can determine exactly where that threshold is and how the valve body is going to behave once it's in the truck. So after a couple testing rounds, couple tweaks on the valve body, they got it sitting exactly where they wanted. While we were over watching the valve body get assembled, the rest of the team was hard at work on doing the hot flush on the transmission and the final assembly on the actual transmission itself. This is another key part that a lot of smaller shops will skip. So if you've had a complete transmission failure, what happens is you're gonna have a lot of metal shaving and debris that's gonna go into the transmission, but it's also gonna go in the trans lines to your truck and in the trans cooler. If you don't get that debris out of there, it's gonna take out your brand new transmission. So normally Tier 1 will actually run this machine for hours if a truck has had a complete failure of the transmission. In my case, because my truck was basically in running, driving perfect shape, we ran it for about a half an hour, but it's gonna hot flush the system and filter out any kind of debris, any kind of particulates, metal shavings, anything else that's in there that might hurt the brand new transmission. So this was key This is a really cool piece of why you want to take your truck to a really good qualified shop for install. Speaking of install, this is where it got really exciting because I could actually see this truck finally being ready to drive, and I was so excited to actually get a built trans in this truck. So it took them a matter of minutes to get the thing back up in the truck, trans phase back in, drive shafts hooked back up, and the thing was ready to go. Now, of course, they didn't just send me off down the road. The other cool part of this is that they do a lot of data logging. So while we data log the valve body on the bench, it's a whole different story when it's in the truck. So they hooked up their scan tool. They also hooked up a couple line pressure sensors, and they actually drove the truck around for about 45 minutes to make sure that everything shifted perfectly. They did low speed, they did high speed driving, they did full throttle, they did light throttle. They basically tested every possible condition, watched all the line pressures all the way through, and made sure this truck was gonna handle exactly as it should.
Still has enough power when you go to your 3/4 just high enough, it won't want to shift. Third, we're in third now. That's all balanced, shifted. This is where it's just a solenoid that shifts it. So the thing with bigger tires is they mess with the valve body because they slow down the rotational speed of the output shaft. The output shaft speed sensor is what actually controls the shifting of the transmission. Your dash does not.
Okay.
So that's why it's making, it shouldn't drop all the way to third, but that's why it is. It's not seeing enough output shaft speed on there, so it's downshifting further.
And with that, the trans was done. But before I loaded the truck up in the trailer to head back to California, the Tier 1 guys insisted on a proper send-off with some Cummins Swap Mustang burnouts. So I'll leave you guys to that footage. The thing was absolutely an animal to see in person. Here's the deal, not all transmission shops are created equal. If you're looking to do a build, going with both a quality builder and a quality installer like Tier 1 is worth the time and effort. You don't want to cut corners with something so vital to your truck's function, and I think the proof is kind of in the pudding when it comes to shops with the separation of good and average, right? The team at Tier 1 was a class act to work with, and their in-depth knowledge and passion for transmissions was awesome to experience firsthand. It really made me realize why I went to their shop and not some of the smaller, closer shops by me. They do a fantastic job, and they're really doing something different with the transmissions they're doing. They're putting a little more care into it, a little more care into the valve body, and on these 47 and 48 transmissions that you're gonna find in second and third gens, the valve body is everything. So getting someone that does the custom work in the valve body like they do is really, really important. So next up, check back in for a full and honest review of the transmission now that it's in the truck. I've had some time on the truck. At this point, I've had a couple months on it, so I've got some good feedback that I want to give you guys, but I wanted to separate that into a separate video because there was so much cool stuff to cover about the actual building of the transmission in this one. So stay tuned for a separate video that is going to be a full in-depth review of that transmission in my truck. But for now, I'll leave you a few more shots of the third gen towing the second gen because it's so cool. And I appreciate you guys watching this video. Stay tuned for the next one, and please hit subscribe if you enjoyed this content.